Vespasian by Suetonius. Translation by Robert Graves. Vespasian, afterwards deified. The family of the Flavians at last brought stable government to the empire. They had found it drifting uneasily through the usurpations and deaths of 3 successive emperors. They were admittedly an obscure family, none of whose members had ever enjoyed high office. Yet there is no cause to be ashamed of their record, though it is generally admitted that Domitian's cruelty and greed justified his assassination. Titus Flavius Petro, a citizen of Rheatt, who fought for Pompey in the Civil War as a centurion, or perhaps a volunteer reservist, made his way back there from the battlefield of Pharsalus, secured an honorable discharge with a full pardon, and took up tax collecting. Although his son Sabinus is said either to have been a leading centurion or to have resigned command of a cohort on grounds of ill health, the truth is that he did not experience military service but became a customs supervisor in Asia, where cities honored him with statues which remained in existence, inscribed to an honest tax gatherer. He later turned banker among the Helvetii, and there died, leaving a wife, Vespasia Pola, and 2 sons, Sabinus and Vespasian. Sabinus, the elder, attained the rank of a city prefect at Rome. Vespasian became emperor. Vespasia Pola belonged to a good family from Nursia. Vespasius Polio, her father, had 3 times held a colonelcy and been camp prefect. Her brother entered the Senate as a praetor. Moreover, on a hilltop some 6 miles along the road to Spoletium stands the village of Vespasii, where a great many tombs testify to the family's antiquity and local renown. As for the popular account of their origins, that the emperor's great-grandfather had been a contractor for the Umbrian laborers who crossed the Po every summer to help the Sabines with their harvest, and that he married and settled in Rheatt, my own careful researches have turned up no evidence to substantiate this. Vespasian was born on the 17th of November, AD 9, in the hamlet of Phelacrina, just beyond Rheatt, during the consulship of Quintus Sulpicius Camerinus and Gaius Pompeius Sabinus, and 5 years before the death of Augustus. His paternal grandmother, Tertulo, brought him up on her estate at Cosa, and as emperor he would often revisit the house, which he kept exactly as it had always been, in an attempt to preserve his childhood memories intact. On feast days and holidays he made a practice of drinking from a little silver cup which had once belonged to his grandmother, so dear was his memory of her. For years he postponed his candidature for the broad purple stripe of senatorial rank, already earned by his brother, and in the end it was his mother who drove him to take this step, not by pleading with him or commanding him by paternal authority, but by constant sarcastic use of the phrase, your brother's footman. Footnote. There is no modern English equivalent for the Latin antiambulo, meaning a client who goes in front of his important patron to clear the way. End of footnote. Vespasian served as a colonel in Thrace, and when quaestorships were being assigned by lot, drew that of Crete and Cyrenaica. His first attempt to win an aedileship, it came to nothing. At the second, he scraped through in only the 6th place. However, as soon as he stood for the praetorship, he obtained it at the first time of asking among those who were at the head of the list. The Senate then being at odds with Gaius, Vespasian, in order to miss no chance of winning his favor, proposed that special games should be held to celebrate the emperor's German victory. He also proposed that, as an additional punishment, the conspirators, footnote, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Gaiatulicus, end of footnote. The conspirators should be denied public burial, and during a full session of the House acknowledge the emperor's graciousness in having invited him to dine at the palace. Meanwhile, Vespasian had married Flavia Domitilla, the ex-mistress of Statilius Capella, an African knight from Sabrata. Her father, Flavius Liberalis, a humble quaestor's clerk from Ferentinum, had appeared before a board of arbitration and established her claim to the full Roman citizenship in place of only a Latin one. Vespasian had 3 children by Flavia, namely Titus, Domitian, and Domitilla. But Domitilla died before he held a magistracy, and so did Flavia herself. He then took up again with Caenis, his former mistress, and one of Antonia's freedwomen and secretaries, who remained his wife in all but name, even when he became emperor. On Claudius's accession, Vespasian was indebted to Narcissus for the command of a legion in Germany, and proceeded to Britain, where he fought 30 battles, subjugated 2 warlike tribes, and captured more than 20 towns, besides the entire Isle of Victus. In these campaigns he served at times under Aulus Plautius, the commander of consular rank, and at times directly under Claudius, earning triumphal decorations, and soon afterwards held a couple of priesthoods, as well as the consulship, for the last 2 months of the year. While waiting for a proconsular appointment, however, he lived in retirement, for fear of Agrippina the Younger's still powerful influence over Nero, and of the animosity which she continued to feel towards any friend of Narcissus even after his death. In the distribution of provinces, Vespasian drew Africa, where his rule was characterized by great justice and dignity, except on a single occasion when the people of Hadrumetum rioted and pelted him with turnips. It is known that he came back no richer than he went, because his credit was so nearly exhausted that, in order to keep up his position, he had to mortgage all his estates to his brother and go into the mule trade, which gave him the nickname Mule Driver. Vespasian is also said to have earned a severe reprimand after getting a young man raised to senatorial rank against his father's wishes, for a fee of 2,000 gold pieces. He toured Greece in Nero's retinue, but offended him deeply by either leaving the room during his song recitals or staying and falling asleep. In consequence, he not only lost the imperial favor, but was dismissed from court and fled to a small, out-of-the-way township, where he hid in terror of his life until finally offered a province with the command of an army. An ancient superstition was current in the East that out of Judea at this time would come the rulers of the world. This prediction, as the event later proved, referred to a Roman emperor, but the rebellious Jews, who read it as referring to themselves, murdered their governor, routed the governor of Assyria when he came down to restore order, and captured an eagle. To crush this uprising, the Romans needed a strong army under an energetic commander who could be trusted not to abuse his considerable powers. The choice fell on Vespasian. He had given single proof of energy, and nothing, it seemed, need be feared from a man of such modest antecedents. 2 legions with 8 cavalry squadrons and 10 auxiliary cohorts were therefore dispatched to join the forces already in Judea, and Vespasian took his elder son, Titus, to serve on his staff. No sooner had they reached Judea than he impressed the neighboring provinces by his prompt tightening up of discipline and his audacious conduct in battle after battle. During the assault on one enemy fortress, he was wounded on the knee by a stone and caught several arrows on his shield. When Nero and Galba were both dead, and Vitellius was disputing the purple with Otho, Vespasian began to remember his imperial ambitions, which had originally been raised by the following omens. An ancient oak tree sacred to Mars, growing on the Flavian estate near Rome, put out a shoot for each of the 3 occasions when his mother was brought to bed, and these clearly had a bearing on each child's future. The first slim shoot withered quickly, and the eldest child, a girl, died within the year. The second shoot was long and healthy, promising good luck, but the third seemed more like a tree than a branch. Sabinus, the father, is said to have been greatly impressed by an inspection of the victim's entrails, and to have congratulated his mother on having a grandson who would become emperor. She roared with laughter and said, "Fancy our going soft in the head before your old mother." Fancy your going soft in the head before your old mother. Later, during Vespasian's aedileship, the Emperor Gaius, furious because Vespasian had not kept the streets clean, as was his duty, ordered some soldiers to load him with mud. They obeyed by stuffing into the fold of his senatorial gown as much as it could hold, an omen interpreted to mean that one day the soil of Italy would be neglected and trampled upon as the result of civil war, but that Vespasian would protect it and, so to speak, take it into his embrace. Then a stray dog picked up a human hand at the crossroads, which it brought into the room where Vespasian was breakfasting, and dropped under the table, a hand being the emblem of power. On another occasion, a plough ox shook off its yoke, burst into Vespasian's dining room, scattered the servants, and fell at his feet, where it lowered its neck as if suddenly exhausted. A cypress tree was also uprooted and hurled to the ground on his grandfather's farm, though there had been no gale to account for the accident. Yet by the next day it had taken root again and was greener and stronger than ever. In Greece, Vespasian dreamed that he and his family would begin to prosper from the moment when Nero lost a tooth, and on the following day, while he was in the imperial quarters, a dentist entered and showed him one of Nero's teeth, which he had just extracted. In Judea, Vespasian consulted the oracle of the god of Carmel, and was given a promise that he would never be disappointed in what he planned or desired, however lofty his ambitions. Also, a distinguished Jewish prisoner of Vespasian's, Josephus by name, insisted that he would soon be released by the very man who had now put him in fetters, and who would then be emperor. Reports of further omens came from Rome. Nero, it seemed, had been warned in a dream shortly before his death to take the sacred chariot of Jupiter, best and greatest, from its shrine to the circus, calling at Vespasian's house as he went. Soon after this, while Galba was on his way to the elections, which gave him a second consulship, a statue of Julius Caesar turned of its own accord to face east. And at Betriacum, when the battle was about to begin, two eagles fought in full view of both armies, but a third appeared from the rising sun and drove off the victor. Still, Vespasian made no move, although his adherents were very ready and indeed impatient to press his claims to the empire, until he was suddenly stirred to action by the fortuitous support of a distant group of soldiers, whom he did not even know. 2,000 men belonging to the 3 legions in Moesia that were reinforcing Otho. They had marched far as Aquileia, despite the news of Otho's defeat and suicide, which reached them on the way, and there had taken advantage of a breakdown of discipline to plunder at pleasure. Then, fearing what the reckoning might be on their return, they hit on the idea of choosing and setting up their own emperor. They felt they were in no way inferior to the troops in Spain who had appointed Galba, and the guards who had appointed Otho, and the troops in Germany who had appointed Vitellius. So they went through the whole list of provincial governors of consular rank at the time, rejecting each name in turn for this reason or that, until in the end they unanimously chose Vespasian, on the strong recommendation of some 3rd Legion men who had been sent to Moesia from Syria just prior to Nero's death, and marking all their standards with his name. Though they were temporarily recalled to their allegiance at this point, and the plan was thus checked, the news of their decision leaked out. Tiberius Alexander, the prefect in Egypt, thereupon became the first to make his legions take the oath to Vespasian. This was the 1st of July, later celebrated as Accession Day, and on the 11th of July, or 2nd, it's just personal footnote, it reads 2 Roman numerals, II, right? So I'll guess that it's the 2nd of July. The army in Judea swore allegiance to Vespasian in person. There things helped him greatly. First, the copy of a letter, possibly forged, in which Otho begged him most earnestly to avenge his death and come to the aid of the empire. Second, a persistent rumor that Vitellius had planned after his victory to restation the legions, transferring those in Germany to the Orient, a much softer option. Lastly, the support of Licinius Mucianus, one of the provincial governors. Footnote, he was governor of Syria. End of footnote. Who, swallowing his jealous hostility towards Vespasian, which he had long made no effort to hide, promised him the army in Syria, and the support of Vologaeus, king of the Parthians, who promised him 40,000 archers. So Vespasian began a new civil war, having sent generals and troops ahead to Italy. He crossed over, in the meantime, to Alexandria, so as to be able to control the keys to Egypt. There he dismissed all his entourage and entered the temple of Serapis, alone, to consult the auspices and discover how long his reign would last. After many propitiatory sacrifices, he turned to go, but was granted a vision of his freedman Basilides, handing him the customary sacred branches, garlands, and bread, although he was well aware that no one had admitted Basilides, who had furthermore for a long time been nearly crippled by rheumatism and was, moreover, far away. Almost at once, dispatches from Italy brought the news of Vitellius's defeat at Cremona and his assassination at Rome. Vespasian, still rather bewildered in his new role of emperor, felt a certain lack of authority and impressiveness, yet both these attributes were granted him. As he sat on the tribunal, two laborers, one blind, the other lame, approached together, begging to be healed. Apparently, the god Serapis had promised them in a dream that if Vespasian would consent to spit in the blind man's eyes and touch the lame man's leg with his heel, both would be made well. Vespasian had so little faith in his curative powers that he showed great reluctance in doing as he was asked. But his friends persuaded him to try them, in the presence of a large audience, too, and the charm worked. At the same time, certain soothsayers were inspired to excavate a sacred site at Tegea in Arcadia, where a hoard of very ancient vases was discovered, all painted with a striking likeness of Vespasian. With such a mighty reputation, he had now been decreed a triumph over the Jews. Vespasian, on his return to Rome, added 8 more consulships to the one he had already earned. A footnote. Every year from AD 70 to AD 79, except AD 78. End of footnote. He also assumed the office of censor, and throughout his reign made it his principal business first to shore up the state, which was virtually in a state of prostration and collapse, and then to proceed to its artistic embellishment. The troops conceded owing to their victory, or distressed and humiliated by defeat, had been indulging in all sorts of wild excesses, and internal dissension could be noted in the provinces and free cities, as well as in certain of the client kingdoms. This led Vespasian to discharge or punish a large number of Vitellius's men, and so far from showing them any special favor, he was slow in paying them even the rewards to which they were entitled. He missed no opportunity of tightening discipline, when a young man reeking of perfume came to thank him for a commission he had asked for and obtained. Vespasian turned his head away in disgust and cancelled the order, saying crushingly, "I should not have minded so much if it had been garlic." When the Marine Fire Brigade, detachments of which had to be constantly on the move between Ostia and Puteoli, and Rome applied for a special shoe allowance, Vespasian not only turned down the application, but instructed them in future to march barefoot, which has been their practice ever since. He reduced the free communities of Achaia, Lycia, Rhodes, Byzantium, and Samos, and the kingdoms of Trajan, Cilicia, and Commagene to provincial status. He garrisoned Cappadocia as a precaution against the frequent barbarian raids, and appointed a governor of consular rank instead of a mere knight. In Rome, which had been made unsightly by fires and collapsed buildings, Vespasian authorized anyone who pleased to take over the vacant sites and build on them if the original owners failed to come forward. He personally inaugurated the restoration of the burned Capitol by collecting the first basketful of rubble and carrying it away on his shoulders, and undertook to replace the 3,000 bronze tablets which had been lost in the fire, hunting high and low for copies of the inscriptions engraved on them. Those ancient, beautiful, phrased records of senatorial decrees and ordinances of the assembly dealt with such matters as alliances, treaties, and the privileges granted to individuals, and dated back almost to the foundation of Rome. He also started work on several new buildings: a temple of peace near the Forum, a temple to Claudius the god on the Caelian hill, begun by Agrippina but almost completely destroyed by Nero, and the Colosseum, or Flavian amphitheater, in the center of the city, on discovering that this had been a favorite project of Augustus. He reformed the senatorial and equestrian orders, weakened by frequent murders and long-standing neglect, replacing undesirable members with the most eligible Italian and provincial candidates available, and to define clearly the difference between these orders as one of status rather than of privilege. He pronounced the following judgment in a dispute between a senator and a knight: "No abuse must be offered a senator. It may only be returned when given." Vespasian found a huge waiting list of lawsuits, old ones left undecided because of interruptions in regular court proceedings, and new ones due to the recent states of emergency. So he drew lots for a board of commissioners to settle war compensation claims and to make emergency decisions in the centumviral court, thus greatly reducing the number of cases. Most of the litigants would otherwise have been dead by the time they were summoned to appear. Since nothing at all had been done to counteract the debauched and reckless style of living then in fashion, Vespasian induced the Senate to decree that any woman who had taken another person's slave as a lover should lose her freedom, and that nobody lending money to a minor should be entitled to collect the debt, even if his father had died. In all other matters, he was from first to last modest and lenient, and more inclined to parade than to cast a veil over his humble origins. Indeed, when certain persons tried to connect his ancestors with the founders of Rome, of Riat, and with one of Heracles' comrades, sorry, that would be again. Indeed, when certain persons tried to connect his ancestors with the founders of Riat and with one of Hercules' comrades, whose tomb is still to be seen on the Salarian Way, Vespasian burst into a roar of laughter. He had anything but a craving for outward show. On the day of his triumph, the painful crawl of the procession so wearied him that he said frankly, "What an old fool I was to demand a triumph, as though I owed this honor to my ancestors, or had it ever made it one of my own ambitions. It serves me right." Moreover, he neither claimed the tribunician power nor adopted the title Father of the Country until very late in his life, and even before the Civil War was over, discontinued the practice of having everyone who attended his morning audiences search for concealed weapons. Just a note about the pronunciation, folks. It serves me right. Moreover, he never claimed the tribunician power, or the power of the tribune. That would be the proper pronunciation for that word. Vespasian showed great patience if his friends took liberties with him in conversation, or lawyers made innuendos in their speeches, or philosophers treated him impertinently, and great restraint in his dealings with Licinius Mucianus, a notoriously immoral fellow who traded on his past services by treating him disrespectfully. Thus he complained only once about Mucianus, and then in private to a common acquaintance, his concluding words being, "But personally I am content to be a male." When Salvius Liberalis was defending a rich client, he earned commendation from Vespasian by daring to ask, "Does the emperor really care whether Hipparchus is or is not worth 1,000,000 gold pieces?" And when Demetrius, the cynic, who had been banished from Rome, happened to meet Vespasian's traveling party, yet made no move to rise or salute him, and barked out some rude remark or other, Vespasian merely commented, "Good dog." Footnote. Cynic is derived from the Greek word kuon, or dog. End of footnote. Not being the sort of man to bear grudges or pay off old scores, he arranged a splendid match for the daughter of his former enemy, Vitellius, even providing her dowry and trousseau. And when Vespasian had been dismissed from Nero's court, and cried in terror, "But what shall I do? Where on earth shall I go?" one of the ushers answered, "Oh, go to Plagueville." Footnote. The Latin is Morbia. There was no such place. End of footnote. And pushed him out of the palace. He now came to beg for forgiveness, and Vespasian did no more than show him the door with an equally short and almost identically framed goodbye. So far was he from being impelled by suspicion or fear to bring about anyone's death that, warned by his friends against Metius Pompeianus, who was believed to have an imperial horoscope, he saddled him with a debt of gratitude by making him consul. My researches show that no innocent party was ever punished during Vespasian's reign, except behind his back or while he was absent from Rome, unless by deliberate defiance of his wishes or by misinforming him about the facts in the case. Towards Helvidius Priscus, who on his return from Syria, was the only man to greet him by the private name of Vespasian, and who throughout his praetorship omitted all courteous mention of him from official orders. He showed no anger until he felt himself virtually reduced to the ranks by Priscus' insufferable rudeness. Thereupon Vespasian banished him, and presently gave orders for his execution. Again, let's see now, that name, Priscus, is actually, let's see, oh boy, I've lost it here, 1 second. I'm simply going to start from the top of them. My researches show that no innocent party was ever punished during Vespasian's reign except behind his back or while he was absent from Rome, unless by deliberate defiance of his wishes or by misinforming him about the facts in the case. Towards Helvidius Priscus, there we go. The name being Helvidius Priscus. Okay? Towards Helvidius Priscus, who, on his return from Syria, was the only man to greet him by the private name of Vespasian, and who, throughout his praetorship, omitted all courteous mention of him from official orders. He showed no anger until he felt himself virtually reduced to the ranks by Priscus's insufferable rudeness. Thereupon Vespasian banished him, and presently gave orders for his execution. Nevertheless, he still attached great importance to saving his life by any possible means, and dispatched messengers to stop the executioners, and he would have saved him had it not been for a mistaken report that Priscus had already been executed. Vespasian never rejoiced in anyone's death, and would often weep when convicted criminals were forced to pay the extreme penalty. His one serious failing was avarice. Not content with restoring the duties remitted by Galba, he levied new and heavier ones, increased and sometimes doubled the tribute due from the provinces, and openly engaged in business dealings which would have disgraced even a private citizen, such as concerning the stocks of certain commodities and then putting them back on the market at inflated prices. He thought nothing of exacting fees from candidates for public office, or of selling pardons to the innocent and guilty alike, and is said to have deliberately raised his greediest prosecutors to positions in which they could fatten their purses satisfactorily before he came down hard on them for extortion. They were at any rate nicknamed his sponges. He put them in to soak, only to squeeze them dry later. Some claim that greed was in Vespasian's very bones, an accusation once thrown at him by an old slave of his, a cattleman. When Vespasian became emperor, the slave begged to be freed, but finding that he was expected to buy the privilege, complained. So the fox has changed his fur, but not his nature. Still, the more credible view is that the emptiness alike of the treasury and the privy purse forced Vespasian to raise money by plunderings and robbery. He himself had confirmed this by declaring at his accession that 400 million gold pieces were needed to put the country on its feet again. That's personal footnote. That's what it reads here. 400 million gold pieces. Okay. Certainly he spent his income to the best possible advantage. However, questionable its sources. Vespasian behaved most generously to all classes, granting subventions to senators who did not possess the property qualifications of their rank, securing impoverished ex-consuls an annual pension of 5,000 gold pieces, rebuilding on a grander scale than before the many cities throughout the empire which had been burned or destroyed by earthquakes, and proving himself a devoted patron of the arts and sciences. He first paid teachers of Latin and Greek rhetoric a regular annual salary of 1,000 gold pieces from the privy purse. He also awarded magnificent prizes and lavish rewards to leading poets, and to artists as well. Notably, the restorers of the Venus of Cos, footnote, consecrated in the new Temple of Peace, apparently copy of Praxiteles' Venus of Cos, end of footnote, and the Colossus, footnote, the colossal statue of Nero. It was afterwards moved by Hadrian to the north of the Flavian Amphitheatre, or Colosseum, end of footnote. An engineer offered to haul some huge columns up to the Capitol at moderate expense by a simple mechanical contrivance, but Vespasian declined his services. "I must always ensure," he said, "that the working classes earn enough money to buy themselves food." Nevertheless, he paid the engineer a very handsome fee. When the theatre of Marcellus opened again after Vespasian had built its new stage, he revived the former musical performances and presented Apelles, the tragic actor, with 4,000 gold pieces. Terpnus and Diodorus, the lyre or lyre players, with 2,000 each, and several others with 1,000. His lowest cash awards were 400. But he also distributed several gold crowns. Moreover, he ordered a great number of formal dinners on a lavish scale to encourage the victualling trade. On the 23rd of December, the Saturnalian festival, he gave special gifts to his male dinner guests, and did the same for women on the 1st of March. Footnote. The Matronalia. End of footnote. But even this generosity could not rid him of his reputation for stinginess. Thus the people of Alexandria continued to call him Sabio Sectes, in brackets, a dealer in small cubes of fish, after one of the meanest of all their kings. And when he died, the famous actor, Favor, footnote, a leading meme, Archimismus, end of footnote, who wore his funeral mask in the procession and gave the customary imitations of his gestures and words, shouted to the imperial agents, "How much will all this cost?" 100,000, they answered. "Then I'll take 1,000 down, and you can just pitch me into the Tiber." Vespasian was square-bodied, with strong, well-proportioned limbs, but always wore a strained expression on his face, so at once, when he asked a well-known wit, "Why not make a joke about me?" the answer came, "I will when you have finished relieving yourself." He enjoyed perfect health and took no medical precautions for preserving it, except to have his throat and body massaged regularly in the ball alley, and to fast one whole day every month. Here follows a general description of his habits. After becoming emperor, he would rise early, before daylight, even to deal with his private correspondence and official reports. Next, he would admit his friends and receive their greetings while he put on his shoes and dressed himself. Having attended to any business that had come up, he would first take a drive and then return to bed for a nap with one of the several mistresses whom he had engaged after Caeneus's death. Finally, he took a bath and went to dinner, where he would be in such a cheerful mood that members of his household usually chose this time to ask favors of him. Indeed, Vespasian, not only at dinner but at other times as well, was nearly always just as good-natured, cracking frequent jokes, and though he had a low and scurrilous form of humor, and often used obscene expressions, some of his witty sayings are still remembered. Taken to task by Mestrius Florus, an ex-consul, for vulgarly saying plaustra instead of plaustra, in brackets, wagons, he graded him the following day as flowerous. Once a woman declared that she was desperately in love with him, and he took her to bed with him. "How shall I enter that item in your expense ledger?" asked his accountant later, on learning that she had got 4,000 gold pieces out of him, and Vespasian replied, "Just put it down to passion for Vespasian." With his knack of apt quotation from the Greek classics, he once described a very tall man whose genitals were grotesquely overdeveloped as striding along with a lance which cast a preposterous shadow. And when, to avoid paying death duties into the privy purse, a very rich freedman named Cyrillus changed his name to Laches and announced that he had been born free, Vespasian quoted, "O Laches, when your life is o'er, Cyrillus, you will be once more." Footnote. From Menander. End of footnote. Most of his humor, however, centered on the disputable ways he made money. He always tried to make them sound less offensive by passing them off as jokes. One of his favorite servants applied for a stewardship on behalf of a man whose brother he claimed to be. "Wait," Vespasian told him, and had the candidate brought in for a private interview. "How much commission would you have paid my servant?" he asked. The man mentioned a sum. "You may pay it directly to me," said Vespasian, giving him the stewardship without delay. When the servant brought the matter up again, Vespasian's advice was, "Go and find another brother. The one you mistook for your own turns out to be mine." Once on a journey, his muleteer dismounted and began shoeing the mules. Vespasian suspected a ruse to hold him up to give a man involved in a lawsuit a chance to approach him. Vespasian made the muleteer tell him just what his shoeing fee would be, and instead of being paid half, Vespasian made the muleteer tell him just what his shoeing fee would be, and insisted on being paid half. Titus complained of the tax which Vespasian had imposed on the contents of the city urinals. Vespasian handed him a coin which had been part of the first day's proceeds. "Does it smell bad?" he asked. And when Titus said no, he went on, "Yet it comes from urine." When a deputation from the Senate reported that a huge and expensive statue had been voted him at public expense, Vespasian held out his open hand with, "The pedestal is waiting." Nothing could stop this flow of humor, even the fear of imminent death. Among the many portents of his end was a yawning crevice in Augustus's mausoleum. That will be for Junia Calvina, he said. She is one of the descendants. And at the fatal sight of a comet, he cried, "Look at that long hair! The king of Parthia must be going to die." His deathbed joke was, "Dear me, I must be turning into a god." During his 9th consulship, Vespasian visited Campania and caught a slight fever. He hurried back to Rome, then went on to Cotyliae and his summer retreat near Riat, where he made things worse by bathing in cold water and getting a stomach chill. Yet he carried on with his imperial duties as usual, and even received deputations at his bedside, until he almost fainted after a sudden violent bout of diarrhea, struggled to rise, muttering that an emperor ought to die on his feet, and collapsed in the arms of the attendants who went to his rescue. This was the 23rd of June, A.D. 79, and he had lived 69 years, 7 months, and 7 days. All accounts agree on Vespasian's supreme confidence in his horoscope and those of his family. Despite frequent plots to murder him, he dared tell the Senate that either his sons would succeed him or no one would. He is said to have dreamed about a pair of scales hanging in the vestibule of the palace. Claudius and his adopted son Nero on one pan were exactly balanced against himself, Titus, and Domitian in the other. And this proved an accurate prophecy, since the families were destined to rule for the same number of years and an equal length of time.